The slender champagne glass shook a little in Julia's perfectly manicured hand as I made my way up to the microphone. I caught her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, now suddenly wide with the first hints of real fear. Meanwhile, my brother Adrian, who had just married Julia and taken over my old job as CEO, was still grinning, completely unaware that my lawyer was quietly slipping him a document that would change everything. Just moments before, Julia had raised her glass and toasted, to fresh starts and fearless futures, her words echoing across the vineyard that our father had poured his life into. I reached for the mic, pulling it from its stand. My voice was low, but the speakers carried it to every corner of the stunned crowd of 200 wedding guests. "You stole a company," I said, my words slicing through the silence. "You married a fraud, and I just took it all back." The crowd's collective gasp was the perfect soundtrack as Adrian's eyes darted over the legal papers: immediate termination, assets frozen, and just 48 hours to clear out of every Weller office. Right then, as Julia's flawless smile crumbled, I felt something I hadn't known in over a year: real, honest-to-God peace. Let me introduce myself. I'm Andrew Weller, 42 years old, the eldest son of Richard Weller, and until recently, the CEO of Weller & Company, the global consulting business my dad built from the ground up. From the time I was a kid, it was always clear I'd be the one to take over. When Dad finally retired a decade ago, I stepped into his shoes. Under my watch, the company flourished. We averaged 18% growth every year, kept our clients happier than ever, and built a workplace culture that earned us Best Place to Work honors 5 years straight. 7 years back, I met Julia Carter at a charity gala. She was 29, driven, and absolutely stunning, working as a marketing strategist for a mid-level agency that handled some of our smaller accounts. What started as professional respect quickly turned personal. Within a year, we were married. I thought I understood love. I trusted her completely. Julia fit right into my world. She charmed our clients, made friends with the staff, and, maybe most impressively, won over my father, who was famously hard to please. She even managed to strike up what looked like a real friendship with my younger brother Adrian, who was always the creative one, though he never quite had my discipline. While I ran the company, Adrian led our design team, talented, but always a step behind me. I still remember Dad telling me that last Christmas before he passed, "Danny, you found yourself the perfect partner. She's got your mother's smarts and her loyalty, too." Loyal. That word almost makes me laugh now. For 5 years, Julia and I built what I thought was a rock-solid marriage. We traveled all over, sat on charity boards together, and threw dinner parties that everyone in our circle talked about for weeks. She was my confidant, my teammate, my closest friend. Whenever I faced tough calls at work, Julia was usually the first person I'd turn to. She knew everything about me, my fears, my hopes, my soft spots. I honestly would have trusted her with my life. But then, 13 months ago, my father died suddenly from a heart attack. My whole world cracked open, and through those cracks, trouble started to creep in. At first, the warning signs were so faint I chalked them up to the messiness of grief. Julia started pulling away, glued to her phone, laughing at texts I never got to see. If I asked, she'd brush it off, just work stuff, nothing interesting, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Adrian started dropping by the house more often, supposedly to help sort out Dad's estate, always showing up right before I left for work or just after Julia had texted to say she'd be home early. They'd always gotten along, so I didn't think much of it. In fact, I was glad they were leaning on each other as we all tried to get through losing Dad. About 3 weeks after we buried Dad, Adrian came into my office holding a stack of papers. "Danny, you're burning the candle at both ends," he told me, his face full of brotherly concern. "You need to give yourself a real chance to grieve. This is just a temporary transfer of executive authority, nothing permanent. It'll let me handle the signing for the next 3 months so you can actually take a break. It's standard, nothing unusual." I hesitated, but Adrian didn't let up. "Dad wouldn't want you working yourself into the ground. If you can't do it for yourself, do it for him. That was all it took. The mention of Dad's wishes pushed me over the edge. I signed the document without even glancing at the fine print, a rookie mistake in our line of work, but this was my brother. This was family. That same week, Julia left a folder sitting on the kitchen counter. Inside were divorce papers. No warning, no heart-to-heart, just a cold, legal phrase, irreconcilable differences. When I confronted her, she looked at me with a voice as flat as a board. "I've outgrown this marriage," she said, "all the warmth that once drew me in completely gone. We want different things now." I was crushed, but my pride wouldn't let me beg. I was too stunned to argue, too wrapped up in my grief over Dad to even try to save what was left of our marriage. I packed up and moved into a small apartment downtown, telling myself I needed the space to deal with losing both my father and my wife. Just 2 weeks later, Adrian called for an emergency board meeting. When I walked in, most of the seats were already taken, some by familiar faces, others by strangers, and a few long-time board members who couldn't even look at me. Adrian stood up and said, "Given Andrew's recent personal struggles and obvious burnout, I'm invoking Section 5 of the Temporary Authority Transfer to take over as full CEO, effective immediately. Our legal team has already signed off on this." Before I could even get a word in, he added, "And to boost our digital strategy, I'm bringing Julia Carter on board as our new strategic communications partner." Right then, the door swung open and Julia walked in, wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hand wrapped around Adrian's arm like she owned the place. That was it, the final blow. My own brother had taken my company. My wife had left me for him. And I'd handed over my power at the lowest point in my life. That night, Julia posted their engagement on Instagram. The caption stung, "From wife of a worker to CEO's queen." Sometimes the universe knows better than we do. Level up. New chapter. Just like that, I was wiped out of my own marriage, my business, and, it seemed, my entire story. For the next 3 months, I vanished. Friends tried to reach me, colleagues sent texts, and people from the industry emailed to check in. I ignored every single one. Most folks figured I was falling apart, maybe drinking myself into a hole, or even thinking about something worse. Adrian and Julia definitely thought so. She posted about moving on from the past and cutting out toxic energy. Adrian gave interviews about bringing new ideas to a company stuck in the past. They were busy rewriting the story, painting me as the problem, the guy holding everyone back. But the truth was, I wasn't drowning my sorrows. I wasn't lost. I was quietly putting together a plan. The moment that changed everything came on what would have been Dad's 70th birthday. I went to his grave alone, set down a bottle of his favorite scotch, and just stood there, thinking. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Weller and Company announces restructuring under new leadership, family legacy enters modern era. The photo showed Adrian and Julia, all smiles, cutting a ribbon at the newly renamed headquarters, the Adrian Weller building. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, sharp sense of purpose. For the first time in months, I saw things clearly. Standing there at my father's grave, I leaned in close and whispered, "They think they've got it all wrapped up, Dad. But they're forgetting one thing, I'm your son, too. And you always drilled it into me, never skipped the fine print." When I walked away from that cemetery, I wasn't the same man who'd arrived. The heartbroken husband and betrayed brother I'd been up until then was gone. In his place was someone colder, sharper, a man who'd lost everything and was ready to fight for what was his. The first thing I did was look for the right people to have in my corner. I reached out to Margaret Abernathy, the attorney who'd worked with our family for years and had only retired the year before Dad passed. Margaret was the one who'd written most of our original company documents, including the bylaws Adrian had conveniently streamlined during his takeover. Over coffee in her cozy home office, far from anyone who might overhear, she gave me a knowing look. "Your father was a crafty old fox," she said. "After that nasty takeover attempt back in '98, he added what we called the Godfather clause to the company charter. She explained that this hidden rule allowed any executive power transfer made under duress, especially within 30 days of a family member's death, to be reversed, as long as the board hadn't voted unanimously. I had to ask, did Adrian have any clue about this? Margaret shook her head. Doubtful. It was tucked away in the appendices of documents your dad kept locked in his personal safe. Only 3 people ever knew about it, your father, me, and Martin Hoffman. Martin had been our CFO emeritus and Dad's closest confidant, a board member who'd quietly retired not long after Adrian took charge. I spent the next several weeks putting my case together, piece by piece. I brought in private investigators to dig into the timeline of Adrian and Julia's relationship. They found text messages going back 8 months before Dad died, innocent at first, but quickly turning into something more. There were hotel bills, secret email accounts, the whole affair had started long before we lost Dad. Through Martin, I managed to get in touch with 2 other board members who'd been pushed aside by Adrian's new leadership. They handed over internal memos showing how Adrian had methodically replaced my team with people who'd do whatever he said. Even more crucial, they confirmed that the board's vote to make Adrian CEO hadn't been unanimous, it was rushed through, with 3 members abstaining. My financial team dug up proof that Adrian had been using company money to buy Julia expensive gifts, even before our divorce was final, a clear conflict of interest and a direct violation of company rules. They also discovered that Julia had gotten into confidential client files using my login months before we split up, and I knew for a fact I'd never given her that information. I pulled all of this together, building 2 separate cases, one for the company's secret arbitration panel, something my dad had set up years ago, and another, more personal file that would never see a courtroom but would ruin Adrian and Julia if it ever came to light. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Carol, my father's old executive assistant. She said, "Your dad left something for you," and handed me a sealed envelope. He made me promise to give this to you only if the company ever changed hands under suspicious circumstances. Inside, I found a short letter and a tiny key for a safe deposit box. The note was straight to the point, "Danny, if you're reading this, someone's gotten the better of you. Remember, in chess, the king who looks like he's in check might actually be setting a trap. What's in this box is your queen." When I opened the safe deposit box, I found a notarized document, a second will, more recent than the one that had been read after Dad died. This one spelled out, in no uncertain terms, that if he passed away, control of Weller and Company could only be transferred from me if 2 things happened: the entire board had to approve, and there had to be a 6-month transition period. Neither of those requirements had been met. With all this ammunition in hand, I triggered the secret arbitration process, invoking the Godfather clause my dad had hidden away. For 2 months, the proceedings unfolded in total secrecy, all while Adrian and Julia were busy planning their over-the-top wedding, completely clueless that the ground was about to give way beneath them. Just a week before their big day, the arbitration panel handed down their decision. I was to be reinstated as the rightful head of Weller and Company, effective immediately. Adrian was fired for cause, and every executive move he'd made would be put under the microscope. But I didn't pull the trigger right away. Instead, I waited, letting them pour a fortune into their extravagant vineyard wedding, the very same vineyard where Dad had taught us both to savor a good glass of wine. I wanted their moment of triumph to become the scene of their downfall. I wanted an audience. The wedding day was picture perfect, blue skies, sunshine, and a level of luxury that bordered on obscene. I got my invitation as family, though I knew it was just for show. They probably figured I'd either skip the whole thing or show up drunk and make a fool of myself. Instead, I walked in stone-cold sober, calm, and dressed to the nines, taking my seat in the front row like the dutiful brother and ex-husband I was pretending to be. The ceremony itself was almost too much to stomach. Adrian stood there, swearing honesty and loyalty to the same woman he'd helped steal from me. Julia promised to be faithful and supportive, using the same lips that had whispered my company's secrets to him behind my back. They sealed it with a kiss, the crowd cheered, and neither of them looked my way. At the reception, I watched them work the crowd, shaking hands and accepting gifts from people who used to be my friends and colleagues. While everyone else toasted with champagne, I stuck to water. I needed my head clear for what was coming. As the evening wore on, the moment I'd been waiting for finally arrived. Julia stood up for the bride's toast, holding her champagne glass high. To fresh starts and fearless futures, she declared, her gaze sweeping over the guests with a look of pure victory. That was my signal. I gave a nod to my team, who were stationed around the room, my attorney, Martin, the 2 board members who'd stuck by me, and the private security I'd hired just for this night. I walked up to the microphone, calm as could be, as if this was all part of the plan. The wedding planner tried to stop me, but my security team quietly stepped in and handled it. "You stole a company," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You married a fraud, and I just took it all back." As I spoke, my attorney made his way to Adrian and handed him the official judgment. I kept going. Effective immediately, Adrian Weller is terminated from Weller & Company for cause. All assets are frozen. You have 48 hours to clear out of every company property and return anything that belongs to Weller. Julia's face went pale as a ghost. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the patio. Adrian fumbled with the paperwork, his expression turning from confusion to panic. "What is this?" he stammered, eyes darting over the legal documents. "It's called the Godfather Clause," I said, making sure the folks at the nearest tables could hear. "Dad's last gift to me. Maybe next time, you'll read the fine print before you try to steal what he built." Security moved in, collecting the company phones, tablets, and laptops that Adrian and Julia had so boldly brought to their own wedding. At the same time, another team was already at headquarters, changing the locks and locking down the servers. Julia grabbed my arm, her voice a furious whisper. "You can't do this. We'll fight you." I leaned in, my words just for her. "Check your email right now." Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and opened her inbox. There, waiting for her, was an email I'd scheduled to hit at that exact moment, full of screenshots of her messages with Adrian from months before our split, proof of her unauthorized access to client files, and evidence tying her to the forged documents that helped push me out. "That's just a taste," I murmured to her, keeping my voice low. "There's enough evidence in there to end your career for good, maybe even land you behind bars for corporate espionage. And if you don't both follow every single term to the letter, every major news outlet in the country gets the full story in an hour." I turned back to the crowd, who were now wide-eyed and holding up their phones, capturing every second of the chaos. With a steady smile, I addressed them, "Please, enjoy the rest of the evening. The open bar is still on the house, courtesy of the real CEO of Weller & Company." As I walked out, a wave of whispers and shocked murmurs followed me. My driver was already waiting, the car door open and ready. I slid into the back seat just as I heard Adrian yelling my name, but I didn't bother to turn around. There was nothing left to say. By midnight, the whole Weller wedding spectacle was blowing up online. By the next morning, it had gone global. The weeks that followed were all about taking apart everything Adrian and Julia had tried to build. Their downfall was as precise and relentless as the plan I'd set in motion. Within hours of the wedding, their access to every company system was cut off. Julia's carefully crafted social media empire collapsed almost overnight when I released proof that she'd used company resources to fake her follower numbers and boost her engagement. Every influencer deal she'd signed, protected by NDAs and tied to her role as strategic partner, was voided in a single day. The whistleblower report I prepared, detailing her unauthorized use of my credentials, landed on the desks of the right regulators. One of our biggest clients hit the company with a $2.5 million lawsuit after learning Julia had stolen their marketing strategy and handed it to a competitor. Then came the screenshots, texts between Adrian and Julia, mocking me, calling me a ghost in a suit and CEO of nothing. Those messages found their way online, and the world saw just how cruel they'd been. Public opinion flipped from curiosity to outrage in a heartbeat. Julia's online persona, which she'd spent years building, fell apart instantly. Her followers turned on her, sponsors dropped her like a hot potato, and news outlets ran story after story about the corporate betrayal wedding. Julia's face became a meme overnight, the social climber who crashed and burned. Adrian didn't escape, either. The forensic audit I'd ordered uncovered over $1.2 million in company money spent on secret getaways, expensive jewelry, and the down payment for a house he and Julia bought while pretending nothing was going on. He was banned from serving on any executive board for 5 years. Old friends and colleagues wanted nothing to do with him. The press gave him a new nickname, the backstabbing brother, and it stuck. Their marriage couldn't survive the fallout. Just 3 months after the wedding, Julia filed for divorce, her second in under 2 years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Half a year after that disastrous wedding, I delivered the final punch, a best-selling exposé called The Godfather Clause, Blood, Betrayal, and the fine print that brought them down. I published it anonymously, but anyone who knew the story could tell it was my work. The book included transcripts, receipts, board documents, and a blow-by-blow account of how they rose and fell. The advance alone was in the 7 figures, and I donated every penny to a foundation for corporate ethics I set up in my father's honor. Eventually, Julia landed a job as a junior marketing consultant at a startup she'd once ridiculed in public, the only place willing to take a gamble on her now tainted reputation. Her Instagram following plummeted from millions to just a few thousand, most of them sticking around just to watch her next misstep. She tried to reinvent herself as a survivor of cancel culture, but nobody was buying her new story. Adrian, on the other hand, packed his bags and moved overseas, hoping a slightly tweaked name would help him start fresh. He reached out to several of our international rivals, but his reputation had already made the rounds. No respectable company wanted anything to do with him. Last I heard, he was teaching basic design classes at a small community college in Canada, his dreams of boardrooms and big deals long gone. As for me, after the book hit the shelves, I never spoke their names again. I went back to the corner office that still bore my father's name, surrounded by the folks who'd stood by me through it all. We overhauled the company, putting the spotlight back on the values Dad had always preached: integrity, excellence, and real loyalty. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I made my way to his grave again, this time with not just his favorite scotch, but 2 glasses. I poured a drink for each of us and raised mine to his headstone. "The king was never really in check, Dad," I said softly. "And your queen played her part just right." I sat there in the quiet, sipping my drink, feeling the autumn wind and, somehow, my father's approval. The company was safe. The traitors were gone. And I'd proven that I was more than just my father's heir, I was his living legacy. Some folks said I went too far, that my revenge was too thorough. But they never understood that this wasn't just about a business or a broken marriage. It was about keeping a promise, about showing the world that the Weller name still meant something. In the end, I didn't just win back what was taken from me. I reclaimed something even more important, my own sense of power. Not the kind that comes from a title or a fat bank account, but the kind you get when you finally realize who you are and what you're capable of when you're pushed to the edge. And that, as my dad always said, is the only kind of power that really matters. And that's where I'll leave you for today. If you enjoyed this story, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Your support helps more folks find my channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, it really helps me keep sharing stories like this. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.